Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, joined by my trusty colleagues, Chris Connolly and Lainey Mays. And first of all, we want to wish you all a happy and a very healthy new year. This is very exciting to be back with all of you and with hopefully a light at the end of this tunnel. And speaking of lights, we have two bright lights with us today. We have authors Nadia Hashimi and Jillian Cantor, who are going to tell you about their page-turning, compelling, thought-provoking, beautiful books. So what we're going to do is talk for a second with them, and then we're going to speak with Nadia, and then we're going to speak with Jillian. And so bring your questions, and we'll send you galleys, and you can read, download, and enjoy these reads, which I swear to God are so captivating and moving. You will not soon forget them. So Nadia Hashimi, hello.
Hi, Virginia and everyone. Thanks for hosting this conversation today.
Oh, sure. We are so happy to have you. And Jillian Cantor, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me and Happy New Year.
Yeah, we're thrilled. You know, Jillian, you both have this library of books, adults and children's books, YA books, and you've touched so many lives with your words, and your support of libraries has been amazing. Nadia has been to ALA several times, and you've just, you bring it every single time with the reads that you deliver, and we're just so grateful to you both for the books that these new books that you have out, both coming out in March, are really captivating and very different. And yet, while I was reading them, I was thinking there's some sort of strain between them. And I never think about that until I'm in them. And then I think there's something connecting these to me. And they're compelling women. They're very strong women. And you both write about fierce, strong female characters. And so we can't wait to get into this with both of you. But so Jillian's book, Half-Life, is sort of like a sliding doors reimagined life of Marie Curie. And it is very, very interesting to sort of see this nonfiction, fiction sort of life of what would have become of her had she gone left or gone right. And it's really, really, really cool. And Nadia's books, the Afghan experience. This is Sparks Like Stars, which is, as they say, coming out in March. And at the center of this book is this fierce child who grows up to be a fierce woman who has to face some really tough things that have happened in her life before she can move on. And it's just so powerful. So we can't wait to get into both of these books with you all. But Jillian, we're going to put you away for a sec. But before we do, if there's anything that you guys want to say to our librarian pals who are watching, now's the time.
Just thank you for joining. And, I love libraries and love librarians. And that has honestly been the one thing I've missed the most the past 9 months is my kids are also voracious readers and we were constantly going to our libraries to browse. So, I love libraries and can't wait to go back soon in the future.
Yes, likewise. And I think that libraries have really shown so much ingenuity right now, and people have realized that libraries are still we're able to still, loan out books from our library digitally and audiobooks. So I'm so grateful for everyone kind of, putting on their thinking caps and finding ways to keep us all connected and deep into stories.
Boy, if that isn't the truth, right? I mean, librarians, like almost immediately when this happened, just learned how to pivot, and how their doors may have shut, depending on where they were in the state of the world, but they didn't. The librarians didn't, and that virtual programming, we can talk about that and how you're both available to do that because, that's a really wonderful thing. Unfortunately, for a terrible reason, but I just think that it's such ingenuity and librarians just figured it out. And they brought to communities that relied on bandwidth that didn't have it. They would go to the libraries for bandwidth, didn't have that available to them. They would either make the parking lot. They would bring bandwidth to the parking lot, come down to the parking lot of the library, or they would go and take the, the bus, the bus that's equipped for reading, and they would, I don't know, bring it to communities that didn't have a lot of that, and they would make that available to communities and get bandwidth to them. So they're heroes. So I'm glad that you said that, both of you. Now, Jillian, so long, farewell. We'll see you in a little
I'm
while.
going to go watch you on Facebook Live now.
Oh, God. All right. Enjoy the virtual M&Ms in the virtual room.
I will.
Bye. Hello. Nadia.
Hello.
How are you?
Yes,
We're so excited.
I'm well, thank you.
Listen, you are amazing.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're so excited to see you. It's been several years since we saw you in person. This is the next best thing. You've been to several library conferences, one where we were snowed in Chicago, and we were watching the Super Bowl trying to figure out what a down was. I love that you said the other day, I still never really found the time to figure out what a down is.
It's not an up, I know that.
It's not an up. It's not. And it's not a pillow. That's a different kind of down. All right, Nadia, stop fooling around. Okay, so let's get to it. I mean, there's so much to talk about with your book. And what a history you have. Your first book, your first three adult novels, now this is your fourth, plus you have 2 YA novels. And you are a pediatrician and a mother of 4. So basically you're a slacker. Amazing.
I get easily distracted.
Well, in the very best way. Now, Sparks Like Stars is your newest book, and we'll dive into that in a second, but I just want to go back a little bit. I was looking at one of our Library Love Fest posts from several years ago, where we had made a clickable link to an interview that you had done. You debuted with The Pearl That Broke Its Shell. I think it was 2014, right?
Yep.
And that was an amazing story about these 2 Afghan women who were separated by a century, and they were only able to find freedom by in this tradition called, is it Bacha Posh?
Yes.
Okay, which allows girls to dress as and live as boys until they are of marriageable age. This book sets you on a trajectory, followed by Khaled Hosseini called that a tender and beautiful family story. Then you did When the Moon is Low, The House Without Windows. I read everything you've written, and I love the stories that you write. You educate as well as entertain, and these are just such heartfelt stories, and the characters are so beautiful, and it's in my opinion just very cinematic, and you can feel it, you can smell it, you can taste it, it's there. So I love these characters. I don't forget them. They're amazing. And so you've done it again with Sparks Like Stars. Now, this is about an Afghan-American woman's quest to return to Kabul and learn the truth about her family after they perished in this coup in 1978. Now, Nadia, have you fallen asleep or are you frozen? She is frozen.
Oh, we're back.
She's back. She woke up. All right, Nadia, enough of me talking. Tell everyone what you want them to know about Sparks Like Stars.
So thank you. That was a really, really generous intro and background. And I'm so grateful for the team that everything that you guys have done around these stories to help me share them, because, I try to write what I would want to read. And I think, growing up, I was always in libraries and, kind of going through the shelves and looking for stories that I was devouring, but probably some part of me was looking for stories that told me the things that I wanted to hear, that told me about characters that I could relate to in a bit of a different way. I mean, I think you can always find some kind of, common ground. So the stories that I choose to write are ones that I hope will be informative and important, but also intriguing, because we always want to be entertained along the way, even if we're learning. Now, for this particular story, I will say that it probably is one that was most heavily influenced by conversations with book clubs. So along the way in the past few years, I've been having lots and lots of conversations around book clubs where we talk about, okay, so this is what the situation is for Afghan refugees or for women in Afghanistan. And then the conversation always comes down to, how did this happen? What happened in Afghanistan that led to this? And how is it possible that my mom graduated from Kabul University and became an engineer, that her sisters all went to college? Like, how is this a reality? And so what I wanted to do for this particular story was to go back in time and take a look at what I find to be that moment, right? That kind of like tipping point where the country is set on this trajectory and it just spirals and spirals and spirals from there. It's also a little bit of, I love historical fiction because it's a little bit like that game of like two truths and a lie, or like three lies and a truth, or whatever the balance might be. But there are a lot of truths that I started, pulling together, historical events or realities of the past, and then tried to create a common thread through them and create a storyline through them. Because I would take a look at some of the stuff that was happening, and it was like, okay, wow, this is really intriguing to me, and I bet it would be intriguing to other people. So the one event that this really all centers around, and I'll just share this little newspaper clipping because I keep it up here, obviously not from an actual newspaper, I printed it out, but this was an Afghan secret revealed, brings an end to an era. And this was a New York Times article about the discovery of the bodies that were buried in an unmarked grave after a 1978 revolution.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there because what you're saying is super important and you were breaking up. So can you say that again? Because I don't want to lose any of this.
Yes, absolutely. So in 1978, there was a coup in Kabul, Afghanistan, and the bodies of the president, of his family members, and some other people who were in the palace that night were buried in an unmarked grave. And that grave was not found until 30 years later. And so it was this article that I pinned to my little board, and I thought, God, that's a crazy event. And then slowly started to pull other pieces to create a story around it.
Okay. Now, okay, can you hear me okay? Because again, breaking up. And Chris, before we go on, because I don't want to lose any of this, is there anything that we can do to make this less jumpy, Chris? Are you guys experiencing what I am?
Yeah, Nadia, we can try. Do you mind trying to enter the Zoom meeting again? Can you exit Zoom and just come back on, and we'll see if that maybe fixes it a little bit?
Okay,
all right, thanks.
that's
And
cool.
for
Don't worry
viewers,
about it.
just hang on. Yeah, no hurry. But viewers, Nadia will be right back with us. And
In the meantime,
two
we
shakes
can
of a lamb's tail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did post a link to the New York Times story that Nadia referenced. So any of you
Great.
watching, it's there in the comments section.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
there
great.
we go.
Yeah, because you know what, it's just such an interesting story, and I hate when that happens. It's like, oh, I don't want to act like it's okay when it's not. You need to hear this.
Yeah, for sure.
It's
There's
okay.
a great behind the book piece too on Edelweiss, which we might have linked, but
Yeah, can we put that up there? That's a very
Yeah,
good
I'll
piece.
share that now.
yeah. And so she also talked about this in the behind the book, so we can more about it.
We'll come back.
Okay, and here we go. We're bringing Nadia back on.
Fingers crossed. Oh, she turned into a puppy.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear us?
Discovered my alter ego.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So hopefully that'll work. So Chris or Lainey posted the piece that you were just talking about, which lends to the background of the story. You got it.
So that's the, I think a lot of stories just start with like kind of one little moment in history or one flash. And that was the flash for Sparks Like Stars.
The coup and this large family that was murdered. And so you are, the reader is swept up in this story from the beginning, because you're this beguiling child who you meet the 10-year-old girl who's at the center of this entire story. And the her childhood is she's beloved. She loves her father. Her mother is beautiful. Her father is, he wants the best for her. I love the relationship with her and her father. I mean, he's so encouraging, and he wants her to, he wants her to be a doctor. And I love the one scene where she comes upon these kids, these boys that are, torturing that dog, and she gives these boys what for, and then the kids run away, and the father says how disappointed he is in her, and she says, well, you tell the story. I'm telling your whole story. You tell that scene. It's so good.
So when he finds her and he says, I'm disappointed, and she says, are you disappointed because I was trying to, wrangle with the guys? And he says, no, it's because you didn't need me.
Yeah. She's on her way.
And I think that comes from, right, she's on her way. And that's not an Afghan, experience. I think that's a universal parenting experience, is that moment when you realize, well,
Right.
you're kind of on your way now.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about, and again, I don't want to give too much away, but she, obviously this horrific thing happens, and her seemingly idealistic world is turned upside down. And then the book takes place over decades, really. Do you want to talk about what she becomes and how your own personal life, your profession informed your writing? I thought that was really interesting. It just rang so true.
Sure. Yeah, and that's something that I haven't really done in other stories to this extent. I've usually written characters that are really removed from my own experience, but for this particular story, and maybe my stories are kind of, circling in and kind of coming closer to me and my experience, and maybe the experience of a lot of other Afghan Americans. But she finds herself in the United States, growing up in the United States for the latter part of her, childhood into adulthood, and becomes a physician. So she is fulfilling that dream that her father had for her, which makes sense to her personally too. It aligns with what she wants to do. And she is in New York City. She's training. She becomes a surgeon. So our paths are different in some ways. I did my training, but I was born and raised in the United States, did my training in New York as well, and I became a pediatrician, but she becomes a surgeon. And that is part of, without giving too much away, part of what brings her past back to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's really an unforgettable character, as are the people in her childhood, but more so the people who usher her through. They stay with you. And I, again, not giving much away, but I don't want to give anything away. But I can only say that the people that she meets on her journey, they usher her through in many ways. And they, I don't know, I just feel like you're along for the ride in a very real way. There's some harrowing scenes in this book, but again, I also see, sort of this. It's warm. There are moments of there is some levity. It can't all be, but it's but she's just wonderful, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot from this book, and I could you talk a little bit about Clay? Could you talk a little bit about the author that she goes to see? I thought that was, that scene in the bookstore where she, kind of opens up her mouth and, says what she says.
So I think So I was a medical student in Brooklyn on 9/11, and I think for the Afghan American community, there was like a before and an after, right? There's a before and an after for everybody when it comes to 9/11. For us, it was like anonymous to notorious, right? And all of a sudden, the whole world's attention on what's happening in Afghanistan, what are Afghans doing, what are they thinking, you know, what's going on over here. And along with that comes the attention of journalists, which I've always had really, you know, deeper and profound respect for what journalists, and specifically, I mean, war correspondents are doing, is going in deep, putting themselves on the line, and bringing us like the human stories of a really dangerous situation. And so that's who Clay is. He's this, you know, war correspondent who has spent time there. And because of this war, because of this intervention, we've had so many Americans spending time in Afghanistan, which hadn't been the case for, you know, most of my childhood. People hadn't spent time there except for the previous generation, which is the hippies and the diplomats and all those people. And so he comes with a very different set of ideas. He comes with a very different perspective, and he's crafted a book where it's a much different take than what the average person might think. And then here she is with her perspective, her knowledge of what was happening on the ground in her childhood at that really pivotal moment, and the tensions, the Cold War tensions, and kind of the truth of what the dynamics were that led to this moment. So her meeting him is sort of these two different perspectives, but aligned in some ways, but different in some ways. And that's the conversation around Afghanistan always. You cannot bring two people together who will have the same views on what's happening or what has happened, but there will always be some common truths in there.
Yeah. I thought that was very interesting. Just sort of like you say, the before and the after, and the time period of the 70s when, you know, it's more cosmopolitan and Western leaning, and then the assumptions. So we have images, that we want to show. Can sort of add to this conversation.
We do. So these are, you know, things that I use. So I keep these, I sort of have like a board that I keep these images on. And these are the things that I turn to when I'm writing the story. These are the images, like this is an image of just, you know, women in the 70s or maybe late 60s in Afghanistan. This is like my mom's generation, right? So this is what I think of, what I've grown up with, were stories of this Kabul, which is very different than what I was seeing on the news.
Right.
And what do we have next? Now these are the hippies. So I'll tell you, people would ask me, where's your family from? And I would say Afghanistan. Everybody would say, where is that? Is that in Africa? Is that in Europe? You know, when I was a kid, I had one classmate whose father was Dutch. And when I told him Afghanistan, he was like, oh, you guys have the best weed. And he was the only person, because he had been one of these guys, right? Not actually one of these guys, but these are the overlanders, the hippies with eyes full of wanderlust, who had traveled down from Europe, from the US, and just kind of, you know, trekked across Afghanistan and in other countries and partook in all kinds of festivities.
And is that true about the weed?
Pediatrician, I don't know.
Right. I read that you said that you didn't tell your mother that part or something like that. You're like, I'm not gonna.
Right. Well, was she gonna let me go back to my friend's house to do math homework there? It's
a great picture. What's this? What are we looking at?
Now this is the presidential palace in Kabul, and so a lot of the story is centered here. And so for writing historical fiction, I'll keep these pictures up because I have not spent time in this presidential palace. But in order to kind of recreate scenes, I keep that area up and to, you know, get a sense of the soldiers standing guard and what that might have felt like.
Right.
Now there are some things that grow up seeing as an Afghan that don't occur to you, like how bizarre it is until you kind of, step back for a second. And war carpets, that's one thing, because there's been so many, like it's been decades of war. And one of the things that has grown out of that is this industry around war carpets. Well, they'll actually weave carpets that have tanks and all kinds of like weapons on them, which seems odd. But it's sort of a documentation of the times, of the history, of what's happening in the country, what people are seeing around them. And so instead of these, floral motifs, you've got this whole like niche industry of war carpets.
That's so interesting.
So those make a small appearance in the story, but just something that visually added to what I was thinking. And then there's the constellations, so sparks like stars. There's a good amount of maybe a little bit of astronomy in there, and taking a look at the night sky and connecting with that. And the revolution happens in the month of Saur, S-A-U-R, which corresponds with the Taurus, the time of Taurus in the night sky. And so the Afghan calendar actually is aligned with the horoscopes. We use the same, which actually took me a long time to figure that out. I never realized that until later in my life. But that's something that I thought, we all kind of look at the same night sky. We all look at the same constellations. And so this little girl is connecting her story with the night sky as well.
Mm-hmm. There are so many references. Oh, so beautiful. I don't know if you want to talk about that this aspect of the story, but the ring.
Well, so there's, this is Bactrian gold. These are antiquities. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on in this story is just that there are so many historic sites in the country. There is the Iconum excavation site where an old, entire city had been found, and this treasure that was taken out of there. And then during the times of war, how these antiquities get plundered. They end up on the black market. They end up in museums in the West. And so this is not really a story about that, which could be its own story, but just something that I wanted to touch on. And so you will find in the book a bit of archaeology, a little bit of antiquities, and how they wander as well.
Mm-hmm. And a little bit of Anastasia.
Yes. Yeah, the Romanov stories is in there too. There's a lot of like little tidbits that once you start digging, the research becomes really fun, and you can throw all these, crazy historical tidbits in there. And this is once the bodies of President Daoud Khan had been found along with his family members. I mean, it's a really tragic story down to, a toddler had been killed as well, and the remains had been found in the grave along with the rest. So they were finally given a proper burial. And so this is an image of, decades later of his remains and his family's remains being laid to rest.
I wasn't the youngest, like 18 months or something. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, as you say, you really did go down a lot of rabbit holes. And so then but it seems so naturally infused into the novel, into the storyline, into how she felt about Anastasia when she finds out that she's always holding out hope that somebody can find something. It's just an absolutely powerful book. I would love it if you would care to read. Well, we have one question first, and then maybe we'll end with the reading. Lainey, you have a question from one of our librarians?
So Maureen Roberts said, fascinating, and can't wait to read it. Did you travel to Afghanistan for your research at all? And did you talk to people who were witness to that event, or any recollections of that time?
So I did not travel to Afghanistan for this, but I did talk to a lot of people, from family members who were in Kabul at the time and who were, peeking behind curtains during the time of the coup and wondering what was going on with the tanks rolling down the street. There were a lot of political disappearings at that time. So people were nervous about what they could say, who they could say it to, who was listening. And then I also talked to some diplomats, people who were stationed in Kabul at the time, and one in particular who was a woman who is not the inspiration. The character is not modeled off of her, one of the characters that you meet in the book, but is sort of modeled off of many of the diplomats who'd been stationed there at the time, with, you know, cocktail parties happening, and, you know, a mom who had been visiting and drinking a bit heavily during her visit to Kabul as well. So there was a lot happening there with eyewitnesses. Some of them I did speak to. There were also many, many interviews. I've got my binder here. There are interviews that are recorded by an organization called ADST. And so, I mean, I love historical fiction. So I will read through all these interviews with many diplomats who were stationed at the US Embassy at the time, who talked about the tensions, the Cold War tensions, what was happening, who they'd been meeting with, and then the surprise of, you know, what happened that day. I mean, the Americans were there. They literally had put on a performance of the musical Oklahoma.
Right.
They were not anticipating a coup. So it was a really interesting period of history.
I forgot about that part. That was crazy. That was so surreal, you know. Okay. A little snippet into this book, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so I'm going to read a small bit from the prologue. Once upon a time, a little girl with velvet ribbons in her hair crouched deep in the belly of a palace, tucked behind copper pots and urns and cartons heavy with treasures of a lost world. Each time she was shaken by the urge to scream, she plunged her teeth into the soft flesh of her forearm. She knew only that she should remain perfectly silent.
Nadia, I so hate to do this, but it's breaking up again.
Is it? Okay.
Let's try it one more time. If it doesn't work,
All right.
we're going to post the
And
prologue.
if it doesn't work, then I will.
Well,
Once upon a time, a little girl with velvet ribbons in her hair crouched deep in the belly of a palace, tucked behind copper pots and urns and cartons heavy with treasures of a lost world. Each time she was shaken by the urge to scream, she plunged her teeth into the soft flesh of her forearm. She knew only that she should remain perfectly silent. Meters above her, soldiers wandered, some solemnly and others less so, through the warren of hallways. Walls were marked with crimson splatters, the fingerprints of revolution. A general, feeling presidential, slid into a plush Victorian sofa and traced the curves of its lacquered arms. His chest puffed to think that people would soon come to appreciate the sacrifices he'd made tonight for the greater good. He stood and walked across a hand-knotted burgundy carpet, delicate white flowers laced through an elephant's foot motif. He checked the sole of his left boot, then his right. He needn't have worried, though. An Afghan carpet, perhaps by design, conceals blood just as well as it conceals spilled tea. The city, a halo around the palace, waited on an announcement from the president to explain the sight of Sukhoi jets and the sound of gunfire. American diplomats stationed in Kabul, some still fuzzy from cocktails, wondered what bizarre conflict had befallen their peaceful and exotic post. One silver-haired American woman, teetering from the effects of a stubby cigarette she purchased off a hippie couple, tried to touch the paper airplanes that soared over her head. She applauded the flash of fireworks, as Americans do. On that night, giants were felled, a dizzying void swallowed all that had once been, but the trembling little girl would not succumb. She would be brave because her father had once told her that the world lived within her, that her bones were made of mountains, that rivers coursed through her veins, that her heartbeat was the sound of 1,000 pounding hooves, that her eyes glittered with the light of a starry sky. I am that girl, and this is my story.
yes. That's just so wonderful. I'm so glad the connection stayed because that was beautiful. And
Yay.
yeah, that was really great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for your patience with our technical difficulties.
We're good. We're all good. So Nadia, we're going to put you in the virtual green room, and you'll come back to say goodbye. Okay.
Will do.
All right. Sparks Like Stars. Nadia Hashimi. Read it, love it. All right. Nadia, go have an M&M. Jillian Cantor, where is she? Christopher, I can't hear you.
Oh, Jillian, come on down. Here we go.
I was just listening to Nadia read. Her book sounds beautiful, and I can't wait to read it.
It's beautiful. I'm telling you. She's a wonderful writer, as are you, Miss Jillian
you.
Cantor.
Thank
My
you.
goodness gracious, USA best-selling author of In Another Time, The Hours Count, Margot, The Lost Letter. So it's fun. You've got adult and YA books, and also ticking off all the boxes for incredible stories that really are so really touch your heart, and you don't forget them. And this Half-Life is just such a cool story about Marie Curie and her life, and how it could have gone in two different directions. And there's so much to talk about. So let's just dive right in. Jillian, tell us what you want us to know about this book.
Okay, well, thank you for saying all that nice stuff. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it. Half-Life, I think you said it in the beginning, it's sort of Sliding Doors meets Marie Curie, which is how I've been thinking of it in my head the whole time. And when I first started writing this book, I was just writing a story about Marie Curie called Half-Life. But I kept coming back to this one little tidbit that I had read. And that was that when she was in her early 20s, she was engaged to this man. She was very poor at the time. She was trying to earn money to go to, she lived in Poland, but she was poor. Women were not allowed to be educated in Poland. So she was trying to earn money to go to Paris and attend the Sorbonne. So she was working as a governess, and she fell in love with the family's oldest child. Well, he wasn't a child, he was in his 20s, but the oldest sibling in the family. They secretly got engaged, and then his mother said that he could not marry Marie because she would never amount to anything and she was not good enough for him. And then I read this little tidbit that she, of course, after that, she ended up moving to Paris. She went to the Sorbonne. She married Pierre. She invented radium. But I read this tidbit that many years later, after her death, he would go sit in front of her institute in Poland and stare at the statue of her in his later years. And I just could not stop thinking about that one tidbit. And so that's where the sliding doors element came in. And I sort of thought, well, what if she had married him? How would her life have been different? But then how would everything have been different if she didn't discover radium? And you sort of see how it sprawls out, affecting not just her, but her two sisters, her potential children, the fate of science, what happens with radium. So the way I wrote the book, there's two points of view. There's Maria, which is what Marie did go by when she was younger. And then there's Marie. The real woman changed her name to Marie when she moved to Paris to study. So you see in alternating chapters, both what happened in Marie's real life and then what might have happened in Maria's fictional life at the same time, sort of side by side. And it delves a lot into gender and class and opportunity for women. And those are topics just like fascinating to me always. So it was a really, really interesting book to write.
Oh, you're muted, Virginia.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad that it was interesting for you to write, because it was certainly interesting to read.
That's good.
we've all read it, and right from the beginning. I mean, because it starts. Let's see, it starts in 1934 in France, and she's 66, and she's dying from.
She's on her deathbed. Yeah.
She's on her deathbed. Radium has done its thing. And I like that she says, I don't have the Nobel Prizes, like they're not keeping me warm, nor the Petite Curies, which I learned about from reading the book. Again, another book that you learn so much about, and how much she contributed, how many lives she saved.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, really, when you think about it. Go left, go right, and what happens, and who lives and who dies as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, there was, and what really fascinated me about Marie Curie is that, she was a woman doing these amazing things in this time when women were very restricted in general. So not only did she, was she brilliant, but she figured out how to accomplish all of this stuff. But then on the personal level, she had all these sort of like personal tragedies that I didn't know about before I started researching. And I don't want to go into them all because I feel like they're spoilers,
Yeah.
but she had a lot of stuff happen in her life, her personal life, that sort of was terrible while all these amazing accomplishments were happening at the same time. So the book, I think, also really explores, like what she would have changed and sort of the importance of family versus the importance of accomplishments. And I discovered a lot about Marie that I didn't know when I was researching, but I was so taken with what a strong woman she was through all of it.
Can you talk about the very beginning of the book? So as you say, the book goes back and forth between Marie and Maria. Am I saying it correctly? Is it
Mhm.
Maria? Okay, so when she's at the platform and her father summons up the money, and then can you just talk about that, and then what happens when you go back to when you flip between the two characters? Because I
Sure.
love
So
that idea.
yeah, so the very first chapter of the book, so this isn't giving anything away. The real Marie wanted to earn money to go to Paris to live with her older sister and to attend the Sorbonne to study. And she quits her governess job after Casimir's breaks up with her, kind of goes back home. She hasn't saved up enough money. And then her father tells her that he's going to help her and he's going to give her the money to go to Paris. So in the very first chapter, she goes with her father to the train. This all happened in real life. She gets on the train, she goes to Paris to study at Sorbonne. But in my book, there's a moment where Casimir, this man she was engaged to, comes to the train station and says, no, I want to marry you in spite of my parents' objections. And then she has to make a choice. And so the book splits from there. In one version, she gets on the train and she goes to Paris. And in the other version, she doesn't get on the train and she marries this man in Poland.
That is what is
I
so
love-
compelling about that. I love that. Go ahead, Chris. I'm just
Oh no, and I was just curious because I was so fascinated by Maria's story because when I started the book, I figured Maria's timeline would be just tragedy throughout, like just missed opportunity throughout. I mean, and there is that, what humanity loses, but it's also she's still who she is, and she's this brilliant, perseverant woman
Yeah.
who's just more focused on family. Was it hard to write that storyline and not give into the just sheer tragedy of this missed opportunity? What was it like writing her storyline?
Well, I really wanted to think about the fact that no life is all good or all bad, and even though Mario missed out on this opportunity for education and she's not going to win the Nobel Prize, maybe she has things in her life that Marie never does. And so I really wanted to show that balance. One thing I did struggle with when I was writing the first draft was sort of figuring out a later course for Maria's life, and what you said that you remembered she was still this brilliant woman. And so I sort of had to figure out how she was going to put that to use in her own way. And I don't think I had that in the first draft, and it was my editor who reminded me of that. So it got in the second draft near the end.
I think it's really interesting to think of her father being this, like, he kind of bolsters her and he wants her to go off. And I mean, two sisters, I don't know if that's uncommon, but two sisters to really go off and study at the Sorbonne, which I don't know, maybe that's more common than I thought. But and in an area where they're kind of told that they can't study, like,
Yeah.
why was her father so intent on them going out and getting an education?
Yeah, so that was true. I mean, her older sister, did study at the Sorbonne and she became a doctor. And then, Marie did go and she got her degrees in chemistry and physics. And their father, I think, was very forward thinking. I mean, he was a feminist, like how we would describe in modern times, but he just felt that his daughters could do anything that men could do, and why not? And he was a teacher in Poland. And so in Poland at the time, it was controlled by Russia and women just didn't have any rights. They weren't allowed to be educated. They weren't allowed to have jobs. They weren't allowed to go to a university. And so I think her father just didn't believe that was right. I'd like to think my father would have been like that in Poland in the 1800s, but I mean, I don't know.
maybe that's our thread for the two books. Fathers who really believed and really that made all the difference, you know? Maybe.
Yeah, you're right, Lainey. That's because they're in both books. I mean, you're writing about these fierce women, fierce and strong, and so one is one is fashioned after a real life person, and the other one is but these existed, these stories existed.
Yeah.
And so yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Um, so you're doing you're keeping to the true storyline. How tough of a dance was it, to sort of keep those threads together? And I think you talked about one character who, oh, well, he couldn't do that because I don't know. I'm trying to remember a tricky part that you had about one of the characters. I can't remember. Maybe it was Pierre or something. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, just how to keep the fact and fiction.
Yeah, I mean, and
together.
also both storylines have a lot of the same characters, but they're very different people in both of the storylines because of this choice, this one choice that she makes. So Marie had two sisters, two older sisters, Brania and Hila. So they end up doing different things in both stories. Pierre's path ends up completely different in both stories. And then Marie also had a niece and a nephew, and children, and so all of them were sort of in both stories, but not exactly the same person. And so the challenge was remembering who everyone was in which story, and that they had the same names. And I did make like a lot of outline sort of charting where everyone was in which story and which time. But then I did have to, I made some mistakes, obviously, that I had to fix when I went back and revised. But I did have to remember, is this Pierre and Maria's story or Pierre and Marie's story? Because he's not the same Pierre for sure. Because he doesn't marry Marie, so he can't be the same man.
Exactly. And so also I really found the concept of flying universities very interesting. So I don't know if you want to tell them a little bit about that, but also I don't know, I was just so impressed with like the perseverance to actually meet, because I feel like that could be really easy to put aside for your other duties.
So there was something called Flying University in Poland when Marie was like late teens, early 20s, and her sister attended. And what it was just groups of women that would meet and educate each other. And they would meet in different places, to avoid being arrested for doing something illegal. Then that's where the term flying came in, because they weren't always meeting in the same place. So the real Marie did attend this flying university in Poland with her sister. And then you see in my story how Maria does something with the flying university also in sort of a fictional way. But I was also really fascinated with that concept and just the idea that, these women had this desire to learn and to do things and to be better, and they were going to figure out how to do it no matter what. And the perseverance I felt was so inspiring.
Well, certainly
And I
at a
just want
time when everything was stacked against them too. I mean,
Yeah, definitely.
go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
Oh, and I'm sorry to interrupt. And I do want to call out the adorable dog next to your shoulders because that's very
Yeah,
important.
she's on the couch. She made it back in. She's watching.
Yay!
But I did just want to talk about just the process of delving into the mind of someone like Marie Curie, a scientist, which there's funny, it's in the early chapters, there's this little exchange when they're in one of these flying universities, and Maria really is trying to learn piano, and she talks about how that's kind of like a lighter pursuit potentially, but whether it's art or science, there's this kind of all-consuming passion. So I'm just curious what it was like to really dive into her mind as a
Yeah, I mean,
scientist.
so I'm not a scientist. I mean, I have to say that up front. And I think high school chemistry was like one of my worst classes ever. So there definitely was a challenge for me to like research the science and to sort of like think in those terms the way Marie would. But I think, something that I felt I had in common with her was just the passion to do what you love. And with writing, you really have to be passionate about it. It's not really easy to write a book or sell a book. And it's something that you only do if you just have this driving passion for it, which I do feel. So I feel like I use my own experience to kind of connect to her, even though, science is much different. And I understand like that obsessive nature that you can't quit until you get something right. I have that quality in myself. And so I definitely related to that and put some of myself in there too. And I should also say, like, Marie is becomes a mother. She has 2 daughters, and that was something else I felt I could relate to, and the struggle for, like for work-life balance. And you want to be a mother to your children, but then your work is also very important to you, and how you always balance those 2 things. And that plays a major role in the book for both Marie and Maria.
So we have a little comments and questions coming in. Janet Lockhart, our friend Janet, wants to know, interested in what the research process was like for you. Were the sources used in several languages, and was translation necessary?
So I mainly read, about Marie Curie's life, and then about the lives of women in Poland. So in terms of translation, her daughter Eve wrote a biography of her mother shortly after she died, and it was written in French, but it was also translated into English, I think at the time or shortly thereafter. So I was able to read that book in English. And then there's several biographies of Marie, which I read, and I have all of that in the back of the book too. So if you read the book, you can definitely get all the names. And then there was a book, I think it was called Marie Curie and Her Daughters, which was really fascinating and talked more about her children. But one interesting thing, just because you asked about translation, the book by her daughter that was translated from the French, everything was spelled different than in the biography of her, which was originally written in English. So and even when I got to the copy editing stage, the copy editor was saying like, well, how is this town in Poland spelled? And I'm like, well, in this book it's spelled this way, and in this book it's spelled this way. So that was sort of my challenge to figure that out, not knowing Polish myself.
Oh,
But I do have it all in the author's note in the back of the book in case anyone does want to check out further reading.
wow, that's fascinating. And I guess another it proves the point that it's the story of who's telling it. So
That's true.
So I just want to read this comment from Kristen Bowers, who is one of our VP of sales at Harper. And so she wrote in the comments, and I just want to read it to you because it says, fascinating read. In each section, the part based on the real life and the imagined part is equally compelling, which is a remarkable achievement. Yay, Jillian Cantor.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much. That made my day.
And then we had another question. Okay, so from Maureen Roberts, was Marie at all motivated by ambition and fame, or so brilliant that she was innately curious and just striving to keep learning?
Marie was definitely not motivated by fame. She hated being famous. So it was her own sort of internal ambition. And that's dealt with a lot in the book. She has a very contentious relationship with the press, and she hates that they pay attention to her. And it ends up like almost killing her at one point, which you see in the book. And she hated the fact that at a certain point, she had to use her fame in order to further her ambition. She sort of needs to play on it to make enough money to run her lab at a certain point in her life. I don't want to give away spoilers for the book, but I mean, that happened in real life. And she just hates that she has to get the attention. She wants to be in the lab. She wants to be, working on the science. And so that's one of the really fascinating things about her that the book goes into for sure.
She's all about the science. Even when she first meets Pierre, I remember, and the whole conversation in her head is she gonna have to like justify herself, which I'm sure is something she faced all the time,
Right.
is having to like explain or justify. She was
And
about
what
science,
and someone asked about research, and I should say in the biographies of her, it included a lot of her letters, and so I really could also sort of get a sense of her voice and what was important to her and what she would talk about. And it was really interesting even to read when she was pregnant and she was writing to her family, and she would like briefly mention her condition, and then it would be all about the science. And so I felt like I got a little bit of her personality from those letters too.
I'd like to read one quick quote, and then I would love it if you'd read just a speck from the book.
Mhm.
But this is from Marie Benedict, a New York Times bestselling author of Lady Clementine and the Only Woman in the Room. I won't read the whole quote, but she says this thoughtful, compelling story delves into issues faced by modern women while inviting readers to ruminate on their own life choices and the domino effect of those decisions. And that's a really telling quote, quite relatable and pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I'm really thankful to her for that quote. And she's an amazing writer as well. I just got her new book, and I'm excited to read it.
Oh, cool. I should mention too, before you read your bit, that JillianCantor.com, wonderful website, great information there about all of your books and reading guides, and also how to invite Jillian to visit your library. So do
Definitely.
that. Go there or call us. Call us up. Jillian, you want to read a quick piece, and then we'll bring Nadia back on?
Sure. So I'm going to just read 2 paragraphs. The first one is the first chapter with Maria, and then the second one is the first chapter with Marie, just the first paragraph of each of those. And this is right after that moment on the train platform that we talked about, where Kazimierz has come to her and said, "Don't get on the train, marry me instead." So this is Maria. "You have a choice. There's always a choice. Kazimierz and I chose each other. We were married a month after that day on the train platform. I became Maria Zaraska at a small church in Warsaw with only Papa and Hila in attendance. His parents disowned him, as they'd promised they would, refused to speak to him or come to our wedding or give him any money. But I had never had any money, and anyway, what was money when we had love? We had each other, and that was everything." And then this is the first paragraph of Marie's first chapter. "You have a choice. There is always a choice. I get on the train to Paris, leaving Kazimierz still standing at the station, looking as though I trampled upon his heart. But my own heart feels free, bursting with so much possibility for my future. The heavy sinking cloud that had crushed my thoughts and my hopes, working so many dull years as a governess, begins to lift as the train pulls away from Warsaw. My university education is finally within my grasp. After all these years, maybe my love for Kazimierz had not been love at all, as now the prospect of giving up university for him does not feel even remotely right to me the way it had only months earlier." And then you get to see where it goes from there.
It's so great. It's so wonderful. What a great conceit, and so beautifully executed. It's
Thank
just
you.
so wonderful. And as I say, you do learn so much. So she was really quite a woman. And just to explore left or right, what happens, what doesn't happen, and that domino effect. Yeah, it's quite something. So that's Half-Life. Jillian Cantor, thank you so much for sharing Marie Curie with us.
Thank you for having me on here. And thank you to everyone for watching and for questions too. It's really fun. This is the first time I've really gotten to talk about Marie. So it was really fun.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. It's funny because, for library marketing, we try and start this early. So many times we'll have authors that say, "I've never spoken about it."
Yeah.
Which is cool. Why don't we bring Nadia back? And I don't know, just wrap it up.
And Jillian, you probably saw this, but I think Beth Alwater was your librarian, and she commented.
Yes, she was
watching.
my elementary school librarian, and I liked her comment. I saw that. It was very cool.
Wait, what's happening? What?
My elementary school librarian was watching. She left a comment.
Oh, that's so
Hi, Beth.
cool. Hi, Nadia. Was there, Lainey, was there another question for Nadia after Nadia signed off?
Yeah, right when you were reading, we had one that came in from our friend Jennifer Winberry, if you don't mind answering before you go. So Nadia, what do you hope your children to take away from your experiences and research for this book?
I hope my children and all children will take away that, the importance of paying attention because if you take a look at the time period, it was kind of like the golden age in Afghanistan's history. It was a very peaceful time. People were having a good time, but there were a lot of rumblings underground. The Cold War tensions were really, they were having an impact. And next thing you know, you've got a coup and a country, going into decades of war. So if there's one thing that I hope my children will take away from this, it's to always be paying attention and kind of trying to read a little bit between the lines.
That's a good question and a good answer. It's important. Anything else that we need to address, because we don't want to log off until questions or comments have been shared? Are we good? Yeah.
We're good. I can't wait to read Half-Life.
Oh, thanks. I know. I can't wait to read yours too.
We'll send them to both of you.
Yes, please do.
So Lainey
Would love that.
said, as I was saying before, like there's a thread here and I can't quite put my finger on it. Lainey said, it's strong women. That's what Lainey.
And the fathers, right? Yeah,
fathers,
no,
yeah.
I thought that was a great point. Great point. And maybe that's why I'm where I am, because my dad is one of those dads.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And strong women who wrote these books. So we salute both of you for these books and all the others that came before. You're moving the needle and touching lives with your words. Really, they're so powerful, and you educated us and entertained us and informed us. Really, thank you both so much for coming on and sharing your books with us and your stories.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all.
Well, you guys, it's 3:03 and we did it. Our first one in 2021 with these fabulous books by these fabulous authors. Half-Life by Jillian Cantor and Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. Both books are coming out in March. Library Reads votes due February 1. So download, read, and love them as we have. And there they are. Next, this coming Thursday, we will have Cynthia D'Apri-Sweeney, author of The Nest and Forthcoming Good Company, and Elizabeth McCracken. We'll talk about her book, The Souvenir Museum. So we're super excited. So come back at 2:00 this Thursday and have fun with us, the Library Love Fest team. Thanking Jillian Cantor and Nadia Hashimi and all librarians for watching. Thank you both so much. Congratulations on these wonderful books that you've written, shared with us, the world. It's great. And we'll see you again, hopefully on Thursday. Take care, everyone. Be well. 2020.
Thank
Be a good
you.
year.
Thank you.
Big newlywed
Bye-bye.
game goodbye kiss. Come on, we can do it, you guys. Mwah. Bye-bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.